Hello, welcome to Grafted Jewish Roots of Christianity. I'm your host, Stephanie Pavlantos. With me today is Dr. Deb Gold. Deb is a psychologist with a specialty in trauma. She is a coach and an author, and she has helped hundreds of women overcome trauma from abuse and divorce. And we're going to talk more about what she has. She has websites, she has a book, and she's got all sorts of resources that you can contact her. But first, I just want to introduce her and welcome you to the show. Thank you for being my guest today.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
And your website, I believe, is Gold Star Coaching. And when you go to her website, you can find her story. And so I asked her if she would share a little bit of her story to begin our session today. Our
Okay.
session.
Actually,
She's going to counsel me.
my website is drdebgold.com.
Okay.
And
Okay.
yeah. And if you want to get to me direct, you can go Gold Star at Dr. Deb.
Okay. Because I looked up Gold Star Coaching, and that's probably how I found you, which is why I thought.
Yeah. No,
but I'll put that later in the show notes. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, it's a long story, but I'm going to try to give you cliff notes. I was being molested by my uncle when my parents had gotten divorced when I was 13. And my mother let her half brother, which was my, I guess, half uncle, however you want to say it. But I didn't really know him. And my mother had been estranged from him for years. And so he moved in with us, and it wasn't very long before he started molesting me. I tried to move in with my dad. I was begging my dad, please let me come stay with you. I didn't tell him why. I was afraid, like a lot of victims are when they first, encounter something like that, especially if you're young. You don't know what to do. You don't know if you're doing something wrong. There's guilt and shame associated with it. And then at the same time, he was telling me that my parents really didn't love me and didn't care about me. And, on and on, the regular kind of
normal predator stuff.
Yeah. And so I ran away from home at 14. I found myself, I ran from Indiana, which is my birthplace, Indianapolis, Indiana. And I ran away to Florida. Interestingly enough, which we can get into a little later, I found myself in Miami Beach, and there was that was in the 60s. So there was tons of, young people.
Right.
It was that time of rebellion and whatnot, because I hitchhiked all the way there. And that was, relatively safe then,
Right.
Now I wouldn't
dream of doing that
15 times before I did it. Yeah. And so anyway, getting down there, I ended up in a place that was typically known as the Jewish Quarter in Miami Beach. And it was all these Jewish men that owned these shops, jewelry stores, and just all kinds of shops all along this strip there. And I used to love to go in there every day because they made me laugh. It was like they all had these thick New York accents, and they were just hilariously funny. And they were natural born comedians. So to me, this was like, oh, this is fun, just talking about. Of course, all of them said, honey, you need to go home. You need to go back home, be with your parents, and of course I was having none of that. So, but it was still fun visiting there. I lived under bridges sometimes. Sometimes I collected bottles and would have enough money to get a place to stay. But it was kind of fun hanging out with a bunch of kids. God protected me. I never got involved in the drug scene or anything like that. But at 15 years old, I found myself pregnant and involved with a man that was twice my age and was an alcoholic. And I didn't even know alcoholic from anything. To me, he just liked to have fun and drink a lot. That's all I did. And so Anyway, he was gone most of the time, and he'd come back and he would go off on these binges, drinking and things, and was working, but spending most of his money on alcohol. And so I found myself on Miami Bridge one night, and I was going to jump. And this is just for anybody that's worried about their children. Prayer is so important. I know I had a praying grandmother and my parents, I'm sure, when I disappeared, and they had no idea if I was dead or alive or what
Right.
happened to me. And I'm on this bridge and I'm screaming at God, and I look up at the heavens, and I'm like, is this all there is? I
Mm.
don't want to live. This is what you made me to be born for. This is,
Right.
was horrible. I don't even remember everything I said, but I was yelling. And I was crying. And then I'd look up, and then I'd look at the water, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. And then I heard this inner voice that I can't tell you to this day if it was audible or not. It felt audible.
Mm.
Step off of the bridge.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, this is weird. What's going on? Step off of the bridge. The life inside of you is not your own, it belongs to me, and I have much for you to do.
Mm.
And I was like, I'd never experienced anything like that. My parents, I didn't go to church except on my own. I went to, I would walk to vacation Bible school and take my brother with me, but my parents, we never went to church or anything. So I wasn't raised with any kind of biblical understanding at all. But I always believed in God, and I felt like I had a relationship with him and could talk at him and yell at him. And that was
Wow.
about the
Yeah.
depth of my
Yeah.
understanding. But I sat down and I was just shaking all over, and I felt like my bones had melted, and I was like, what is happening to me? And I'm crying. And
Wow.
anyway, long story short, my life didn't totally change then, but things did start to look a little bit better. And I realized, that this baby did not belong just to me, but belonged to God. So I never wanted to try anything like that again. And fast forward, I married the baby's father, and we had two more children. And he was a total alcoholic and never, changed. I got to a moment of truth with him. There was physical abuse, emotional abuse, and I would take my kids sometimes driving around looking for his car in a bar somewhere, and going in humiliated and embarrassed and saying, could I would try to get some money for food before he spent all of the money, all the rent money and all the
Right.
food, and get money for food. And of course, when you're walking back out, you hear the chuckles and the laughter and the, chiding him, his wife having to come and get money, things like that. And it was so shameful and humiliating, but I knew I wanted to make sure my kids were okay.
Right.
So from that, I finally got to that moment of truth where I divorced him.
Mm.
I realized, this was not gonna work out. And my oldest daughter, the one I stood on the bridge with, um, was always begging me, "Mommy, you need to divorce him. You need to." She felt like she couldn't have friends over or anything because she
Right.
never knew if he was gonna come home drunk and embarrass
Mm.
her. So I went through all that trauma. Finally, I married this man that I thought was the love of my life, just
Mm.
totally, you know, gosh, I hit the jackpot this time. Well, it turned out initially that was kind of true. He had a dark side that nobody else knew about, but we did get saved, and we did start going to church, and we did, he allowed me to go back to school, and I had to
Mm.
get a GED, and then I went to college. And I always remembered that day on the bridge, and I remembered that God told me he had something for me to do.
Mhm.
And what I initially started in the field of therapy was childhood psychology, and I worked with the adolescent
Mhm.
children,
Hmm.
and had in Los Angeles County had a contract for years with the probation department, working with their population of kids that had been troubled. And
Okay.
I thought, this is it. This is, this is
Hmm.
what I
Hmm.
was supposed to do. This is what I was made for. And I did for a long time. And then my second husband, whom I thought we had the perfect family. We had the house on the hill. We had ended up building a ministry. We both got our PhDs in psychology. We were married over 25 years. And
Wow.
so there was a lot of, I'm fast forwarding a lot, leaving a lot of info out.
Right. Right.
But he was addicted to pornography. He
Mm.
had bipolar disorder and refused to medicate himself properly. And there was just a lot of scenarios, kind of the perfect storm that happened.
Right.
And he just walked in one day, and I found out he was having an affair.
Mm.
He put a gun to my head and threatened to kill me. And I was, pretty naive, so I'm like, you know, in the name of Jesus, because I was, in the church at that time.
Hmm.
I'm going to be standing before you, Lord, and I don't know where he's going to be standing, but if I'm standing before you, anyway, whatever I said caused him to put the gun down, and he left.
Mm.
Believe it or not, should have known better as a psychologist, I took him back.
Oh, okay.
I forgave him for that indiscretion. And then just a year later, when I was finally just barely beginning to trust him again, he came in and said, I don't want to be married anymore. I don't want to be
Mm.
in the ministry. I don't want to, you
Hmm.
can have the nonprofit, the counseling center, the church, everything. I'm gone. And he was.
Wow.
And so, but through those years, like I said, he had a dark side, and I did suffer a lot of emotional abuse during that time.
Hmm.
And it was after that I really realized that my true call was to help women
Mm.
t that have gone through traumatic issues.
Hmm.
Because when you go through traumatic events, it changes the wiring in your brain, and
Hmm.
you are no longer able to really discern real threats from imaginary threats. And sometimes, and I'm speaking to women out there, I hope, that are in abusive relationships. Not that I hope you're in abusive
Right.
relationships, but if you are, I hope you're listening, that sometimes you feel comfortable in those kind of relationships because there's a familiarity there that I know how to navigate in this.
Hmm.
And you tell yourself, which I told myself all through my second marriage, because it wasn't idyllic, even though it looked like it was on the outside to everybody else.
Mm. Yes.
Um, I I would tell myself, well, it's not as bad as it was when I was married to the kid's dad.
Right.
Marriage is supposed to be hard, and yada yada
Hmm.
yada. And
Hmm.
so all of the excuses are trauma responses to allow to you try to connect on some kind of level that you're not really in touch though with reality, and oftentimes you can't see the flags that
Hmm.
are there because you want something so badly.
Right. And I have heard that where, even women who may have been abused as children in by a father end up marrying a man just like their father. You marry into abuse because it might even be a different abuse, so it's not as bad as what you experienced at home.
Right.
And so as long as it's a little bit better, you think, oh, okay, this isn't so bad because I can deal with this. And I think that we as women also, things that I hear so
Mhm.
much too, it's just that, well, I can change him, or I can help him see, I can show him Jesus. And it's just doesn't happen. They have to be willing to go there themselves. And and it sounds like your second husband basically chose the adulterous life over a relationship with Jesus. You know, he would rather do that than be in ministry helping people because you know, it comes from a selfishness, I guess, as
Yeah,
you know, deep
it
down. It's
it does, and it also comes from he was abused as a child by his mother, and
mm-hmm.
so he had an unhealthy
Right.
viewpoint of, what love really was, and,
Yes.
he was more attention grabbing. Uh,
Mm,
he loved the limelight, and if women said anything to him, he would be so flattered and just, like,
yes.
in awe of, and looking for something,
Right.
I think, more that would make him feel better, you know,
Mm-hmm.
but the problem is always within. And
Mm-hmm.
what we try to do as women far too often is we internalize the problem. If I was prettier,
Mm,
if I was this, if I was sexier, if
right.
I was, whatever,
Yeah.
that he wouldn't do this.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's what they're being told,
Right.
it's all your fault.
Right.
And that's
And
yeah. Go ahead.
no, I'm sorry. I was just gonna say, and that happens a lot. Even if the physical and verbal abuse doesn't happen, you can be in a relationship with those kinds of mind games that this is your fault that I did this, or this is your fault that this happened. I wouldn't have reacted this way if you hadn't said that. And I mean, it's sad, but it's a lot of our relationships, I think, that it comes out of a place where you don't want to take responsibility for your own actions and your own words. And so we place the blame on others.
Definitely. And that it's easy when you're wounded
Mhm.
and you
Mhm.
have a low self, and for women out there that are listening, not only was he addicted to pornography, but he was having affairs with women in the church,
Mm. Wow.
unhealthy kind of relationships. And so as a woman,
Mhm.
you take it so personally. It
Oh,
affects,
yeah.
how you view yourself and your own
Mhm.
self-worth and your own self-image.
It's rejection.
It's total rejection, and you feel like there's something flawed in you
Mm.
without really taking into account that he's the one with the problem. He's
Mhm.
the one with the issue. I mean,
Mhm.
because on the outside, we had everything. We had this, 4,000 square foot house in California with
Mm.
lake view overlooking, this beautiful lake. We had motorhomes, we had boats, we had, you know, everything.
Everything from
Yeah, our
everybody else's
children.
perspective.
Yeah, my daughter was the worship leader. We had her husband was the youth leader. We had over 300 uh,
Wow.
in the congregation. We had a youth ministry that sometimes would blossom up over 500 kids. And
Wow.
so we thought, man, the utopia. But a
Mm.
lot of people didn't know what was really going on the inside,
Yes.
behind the scenes.
Right.
Because a dutiful wife, and some of you that are listening will relate to that,
Mhm.
doesn't want her husband to look bad, doesn't want to stumble other people in the congregation. And when
Right.
you're in leadership, you really don't have anywhere to go
Mhm.
for help. I tried to get him on several occasions to go, have us both
Mhm.
go, for marriage counseling or for him to get help, because I
Right.
some of these issues. And it was always, no, I can't do that. No, I'm a psychologist myself. I can handle this. I know what I need to do and blah, blah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is
And
bad.
then you don't want to be embarrassed that you have a problem and you're in ministry in the church and you have your own business and you have your own ministry and yeah.
And in the
So,
city, people in city council know you.
right.
People in the leadership of a community, the mayor, all those people
Mhm.
know you. They've given you awards for your counseling center and things like that.
Wow. Wow.
And so you're
Yes.
like living in this fishbowl, where everybody
Mhm.
can see everything that's going on in your life. And I understand where he was coming from about not wanting to go anywhere.
Mhm.
And I think that's a problem with all of us with being
Mhm.
vulnerable. You know, when you've been abused or you've gone through abuse,
Mhm.
vulnerability is a is a very difficult thing to become vulnerable, because if I'm really vulnerable, somebody's going to hurt me again.
Mhm.
Somebody's going to take advantage of me. Somebody's going to use it against me.
Right. Right. And that does happen.
Yep. And it
You
does.
you would hope that it wouldn't, but yeah, I mean, I opened up once to someone in authority within the church about some issues, problems that my husband and I were having. And next thing I know, my ordination is being, canceled. And it's like, well, you can't go and do this if you're having these problems at home. And they weren't problems, big, horrible, amoral, problems. They were just problems that we were having that we couldn't get past. And but it was hard. And then I was, basically told later, you can't tell everyone, or certain people. You have to know who you're going to talk to, and that's not going to go any further, and that it's somebody that you can trust. And often we think that this is a trusting person, a person that I can trust and I can be open with and vulnerable with. And then you find out, no, it's the wrong person. So,
Right.
and
Right.
that's hard.
And you know how important it is when you read the Bible, when you understand from a Hebraic perspective or from
Mhm.
any perspective, over and over again, God says, I will be with you. I'm your strong right arm.
Mhm.
Fear not, for I am with you. I'm your front guard. I'm your rear guard.
Mhm.
I will
Right.
never leave you or forsake you. All of this has to do with being safe,
Hmm.
because to really learn and to grow spiritually, um, God is the best psychologist ever, because he made us and he knows we are how fearfully and wonderfully made,
Right.
and the thought he went into, just to create us. So
Hmm.
he understands all of that, and he understands that we need to feel safe.
Right. Yeah, he does. And I mean, and it is true. That is, I mean, it's one of the basic needs, I think, of any living thing, really. I mean, you think of, I mean, and I'm not trying to make light of anything, but my dog needs to feel safe when she's scared,
Right.
and when a dog is scared, they'll fight, they'll bite, they'll become a little aggressive because they're afraid. And people do the same thing. You actually put a quote today on Facebook that I thought was good, and you said, "Our brains are wired for connection, but when trauma we rewires them for protection. That's why healthy relationships are difficult for wounded people." And boy, I thought that was a great quote, because it's true. You think of people who have been through trauma, it is very difficult to have a healthy relationship with them, because you tend to start pushing everyone away.
Right.
You don't, I mean, and you might even, and even that old saying that hurt people. And it's true. You do. When you're hurting, you're going to snap at people. You're going to maybe yell at people. You're going to attack them. If you feel attacked, you're going to attack back. And it's really hard. It's a slippery slope, I guess, in the sense that it's like, how do I get out of this cycle, of what's going on in my heart and what's going on with my emotions and my feelings and my own self-preservation.
Right. Right. And part of the key to that is vulnerability too. We I can testify, I'll just use me as an example, because I know me better than I know most anybody.
Mhm.
We, for years, I was single for 12 years after my second marriage, and I would only let some people get so close to me before I would shut down, because, okay, I'll let you get this close, but you're not going to really know me intimately. I'm
Mhm.
not gonna share my soul with you, or my
Right.
deepest, darkest maybe not dark feelings or, whatever, because I don't trust you. I don't trust anybody. I've been, hung out to dry too many times. And so, even in therapy, one of the things I always do is I make sure everybody knows that this is a safe environment, that I cannot, by my code of ethics, talk to anybody about or share anything that you share with me.
Right.
And I think everybody needs that safe space, where they can just feel, okay, I've got to tell you all of this. I've even had clients that say, I'm really embarrassed to tell you this. And I always tell them, don't be embarrassed. This is the reality. There's reality out there that people live with every day that nobody else knows about.
Right.
And there really is nothing new under the sun.
Right.
God knows it all. He's seen it all. It's nothing. He's not going to be sitting on his throne going, oh my gosh, he did
Something
this,
new.
he did this, or you thought that,
Right.
I don't know what we think sometimes,
I know.
It's like, really,
I know. And it's hard to surprise an all-knowing God.
Right.
But on the other side, it's hard to disappoint an all-knowing God. Really, if we really understand that he knows everything about us, is he going to be disappointed? Well, in the sense that, like, we can disappoint people and they don't forget it, or they don't forgive you, or whatever. God isn't like that. Does he know? Does he wish we didn't make that decision? Absolutely. But I don't think that we disappoint him in the way that we disappoint human beings, because he already knows. It wasn't a surprise.
It never, nothing is ever a surprise to him, and he already knows all the answers. Sometimes we don't want to hear them. But he knows the answers, and we, sad as it sounds, most of the time we know the answers.
Yeah.
And that's really what a psychologist does, basically, is get you to draw you out and help you to examine your thoughts. It's interesting because we talk to ourselves, they've estimated between 40 and 50,000 words a day.
Wow.
You talk to you more than anybody else talks to you.
That's true. Probably. Yeah.
Yeah. Because you lay there in bed and you think, well, I don't talk to myself. You just did. Well, I don't talk to myself. And you wake up in the morning. Oh, I wonder what I should wear today. Oh my gosh, it's Monday. Ugh. I've got to do this, I've got to do that, and you're all of this conversation going on all the time, 24/7.
Right.
More than until you're really aware of it, you don't really realize how much you talk to yourself. And so what I like to do with my clients is I ask them to challenge their thoughts. When you have a negative thought about yourself, would you say that thought to your best friend?
Right.
Like, for an example, I'll give you a thought that probably almost every woman on the planet's had. Oh God, I look fat. I wish I wasn't, I wish I didn't have this. I wish I didn't have that. I wish these wrinkles weren't there. I wish, my skin's getting flabby, I hate myself. Would you say that to your friend? Would you say, oh, you're really looking fat today? You're starting to look flabby. You're really wrinkled, You would never
Right.
say that.
I mean, you wouldn't even say it to your own mother, really. I mean, it's like, no, Mom, of course you're not fat. Or, no, you're not looking old. Or, hey, you've been alive for a long time. It's okay, But yeah, we don't give ourselves that kind of grace. That it's
no. And we are just as important to God when he hears us talking about ourselves in a negative manner. We're his, I'm presuming mostly women listen to you. I'm sure some men do.
Yeah, I have both men and women, but yeah.
Yeah, you're either a princess or a prince to God. You're his baby. How are you talking to yourself? How are you treating yourself? Because that could be offensive to him.
And I don't think men have that issue as much. I mean, My husband, he may look back and say, "Oh, I was so much stronger, 20 years ago," or "I had so much more muscle 20 years ago than I do now." And but
Right.
but but yet he still knows he's a strong man in a sense. I mean, he knows what he is capable of, and he doesn't deny that. And
Right.
he's very secure that this is what I can do. I can still defend my family. I can still, I can still go out. We have sheep and stuff, and he goes, I can still pick up that sheep when I have to and move it, you know. And so he's very secure. And I mean, and he gives, when he gives advice, he's like, I've done this, thousands of times. It's worked every time this way. And and I'm secure in knowing that if I give you this advice, I know what I'm talking about. So I don't think that men have as much negative self-talk. Maybe I'm wrong, but it just doesn't seem like my husband has a lot of negative
Yeah.
self-talk.
Well, men's brains, I read this book one time and it really clarified it for me a lot. And it's men's brains are like waffles and
Hmm.
women's are like spaghetti.
Oh yeah,
Men's are compartmentalized.
right.
Thoughts,
Yeah,
they're very task oriented in this, but
right.
ours being like spaghetti, one touches the other.
Yeah,
How
yeah.
I look touches what kind of wife I am, what kind of
Mm.
mother I am, what kind of,
Everything's connected.
everything's connected. And with men,
Mhm.
you're right. I think it is a little bit easier for them not to
Mhm. And
connect
even
about
people,
what
he can
they're
compartmentalize people. If this person always does this, boom, they're in that box.
right.
This is what I expect. I don't expect anything less or anything more because this is what they always do. This is how they always react. This is, so he is very, very much like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, they can
We are.
change.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, I think women are more the eternal optimists,
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. And
Hmm.
we have to be that way because we raise children
Hmm.
in the home and we have to see that, when we look at a child and they've messed their pants at 3 years old for the third time that week,
Yes.
we have to see that that's going to change. We
Hmm.
don't get the idea that, okay, you've messed your pants, you'll be in college and, mess
Yes.
your pants, you're,
Yeah.
we know that's not a forever thing and we can
Right.
see kind of ahead on things. And I think that's why women are a little bit more intuitive,
Hmm.
almost, not psychic. I don't want to use that term,
No, no,
but
I
they're
know what you
able
mean.
to look into the future a little bit easier than men because of
Yeah.
how we're wired.
Right. And I even heard a message on that. A friend I know who speaks and teaches, and he was saying that in the word woman, or actually in the word female, because it's a different word in Hebrew, but is that kind of watcher on the wall type of meaning in that word. And so they're the ones who are kind of in a sense looking ahead, looking at the future, looking around for what can hurt or help their family. And it's something that the Lord's put in them as
Yeah.
women, to do that for their family. And that is, I think that goes along with what you're saying. They're the ones who, like, okay, this child's only 3. In a week, so much can change. In a month, even more. So
Right, right, right.
like, it just takes some time. Give them time.
Yeah.
So you're right.
But only
um
if we would allow ourselves that.
exactly. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I wanted to just jump to another topic real fast because we don't have a whole lot of time, and it's a good topic, but I really want to get to, we talked about, in my case, I found it's a verse that's repeated quite often in the Torah, but it's Deuteronomy 5:9. And he says that I am the Lord your God. I am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity on the fathers, on the children for the third and fourth generations of those who hate me. And then the positive side, but showing steadfast love to thousands. And I think some Bibles have thousands of generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. And so we were kind of talking about generational curses because it's a very real thing. And I'd love for you to explain that, but also the word visit here, what it means to visit the iniquity of the fathers.
Mhm. Okay.
So,
Yeah, it's really interesting. And when I first really started getting the full revelation of this was when I started doing research for my book. My mother was molested by her father at 11 years old,
mm,
and
mm,
then I was molested by my uncle at 13, and then my daughter ended up getting molested by a family member. And I really had to stop and look at this thing is generational, and
right.
certain spirits, will demonic influences will attach themselves to pain,
Mm,
trauma, and
right.
injury, and they will visit each generation. But each generation, visit doesn't mean inhabit. It doesn't mean that they're stuck with this. It
Mm,
means that because what I believe it means, is it's because of repetitive behavior that
mm,
you've grown up with. When you've grown up with someone who's lived in trauma, 85% of what we do and how we behave and how we address situations and
mm,
problems is modeled after our parents.
right.
So if you grew up with a fearful mother because of trauma,
Hmm.
chances are you're going to be fearful, which is an open door for traumatic events to happen to you, or,
Mm,
any other kind of situation,
right.
control, things like that can be generational. If you grew up in a home where your mother was or your father was very controlling and manipulative, you're going to tend to feel comfortable when you can control situations because that's what
Yes.
was modeled for you. So
Right.
it visits one generation to the next
Mm,
generation. But every generation has that opportunity to stand up and renounce. And I think that's what's so beautiful about Yom Kippur, because what we do is we renounce all of those
mm,
generational things that have come against us to our bloodline. And we, basically say it stops here.
right.
And
Right.
so when we go through the fall feast, where this is a month of Elul, where we're all looking, internally and examining ourselves, what a perfect time to address
Mm,
anything that I have learned generationally, Father. Help me to see it, bring it to my attention, and help me to, move away from it or stop
mhm,
it with my
mhm,
generation, that it won't go down to my children or my grandchildren.
mhm.
It stops with
I
me.
think that's really excellent because I think it's, in the Lord's calendar, he instituted times that we did things like this, that we examined ourselves, that we examined, even Rosh Hashanah, we kind of, I think it deter I might say it incorrectly, but if it's going to be a good year or a bad year, it depends on what you've done and how faithful and what you repent of. It's about repenting. Rosh
Right.
Hashanah is repenting. And so then as you get to the other feasts, and then at the end, the Feast of Sukkot is more or less a big celebration. And so now you've gone through all the hard work during this fall season, and
Yeah.
now there's a celebration. That's kind of how I see it. Maybe it's not totally the way you would explain it, but I find it interesting because I had a wonderful woman who mentored me in my 20s, and kind of, she knew my family situation, she knew the things that were there, um and she would help me pray and say, Lord, I want to break these cycles of favoritism. I want to break these cycles of jealousy, you know, and while they might not be terrible things in a sense, compared to some types of abuse, but they still can destroy your family. They can still destroy relationships.
Right.
Jealousy can be very destructive, and so can favoritism. And those were two of the things that I saw passed from my grandmother down to my aunts and down to my own mom. And then, just feeling. and seeing that it was a normal thing, and not wanting to feel that, not wanting to be jealous of the even the attention, that somebody else gets in my family over me or whatever. I didn't want to feel that way. And but she would walk me through those things. But those were like generational curses. You see your mother playing favoritism, and then you grow up, you become a mother, and you start playing favoritism, and you know just
Mhm.
didn't want that to happen in my own family. So
Yeah, that's a great insight, because when we look at the Bible, it is filled with dysfunctional families.
it is.
You know,
It
I
is.
mean, Jacob and his sons,
Hmm.
that's one for the books. And
Hmm.
where favoritism with Joseph was
Hmm.
a huge problem for all of them,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
especially for Joseph. And so there's all of these that were written for our edification and for our
How not to be.
how not to be. Yeah. And Paul said it best, I think. I've always said that Paul was, because I do a lot of practice with cognitive therapy, and I
Okay.
always say Paul's the best cognitive therapist ever, because he said, grab those thoughts, capture them,
Mm.
those vain imaginations, those thoughts, and and cast them down. And when you capture something, you have to look at it and you have to examine it. Where did that thought come from? What is
Right.
the basis for it? Is it reality? Is it not reality? And he says, think on these things: whatever thing is pure, whatever thing is good, whatever is good of report, think on these. And
Mm-hmm.
so he tells us what we should be thinking about, rather than how can I get attention if I'm jealous of my brother, and how can I
Mm-hmm.
do this or that, that'll garner, the attention that I seek. I grew up with that kind of, my mother was very favoritism. She showed favoritism to my brother,
Mm-hmm.
and I was always trying to figure out, well, okay, I'll be an overachiever. I'll get
Right.
straight A's. I'll do, and all of it's connected in one way or another. And it all has to do with dysfunction.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the way God created us to
Right.
be. But how do we deal with it? We have to challenge every thought and look at every thought and try to understand where it came from,
Mm-hmm.
and
It's true.
examine if it's true or false. Because where would we be without our stories? I mean,
Mm.
what
Yeah.
what we tell ourselves of who we are and what we're about, where would we be if we didn't have those?
Mm-hmm. And how we overcame, right? I mean, I think that's the point you're making. It's like when we overcome that roadblock or that thing in our past, and even victimization and trauma. I mean, once we get to the other side of it, I think that goes along with Revelation. I want to say 2:17, where it talks about, he will give us a name that only he himself knows, because he alone knows what we've overcome,
Right.
what we have, what we've lived through, and then managed to just be an overcomer. And that's in there. That word is in the Bible, well, quite a lot as well. And I think that he is proud of us when we overcome, and we can be proud of ourselves. And I even think when you're mentioning that whatever is pure, whatever is beautiful, whatever is good, you know it's even doing that in our self-talk.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
if we can sit there and look in the mirror and say, but I've got pretty nice hair, yeah, I may need to lose a few pounds, but I've got nice hair.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, find what's good, what we're happy about, what wouldn't we change,
Right.
about ourselves.
Right. No, that is very true. And and when in just living from day to day, I think we need to be vulnerable with each other. And the scripture says we are supposed to confess our sins one to the other. Well, if you look at any kind of 12-step program, whether it's Alcoholics Anonymous, whether it's Narcotics Anonymous, or any kind of um, self-help program that is out there, one of the first things you have to do is to get real and do an inventory,
Mm.
and everybody knows it's famous. You walk into a room, if you're an alcoholic, hi Bob, my name's Bob and I'm an alcoholic,
Right.
hi Bob,
Yeah.
anyway, that kind of thing. Well, in the book of Revelation, it tells us, I think it's in the 12th chapter, but I could be wrong about that. It says that we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony.
Yes.
So it's so important that we share our overcoming testimonies with each other instead of trying to hide them.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of
So true.
she's going to think, or he's going to think, or, that I'm not really faithful, that I'm not really full of the glory of God or whatever. When your testimony could be a lifeline for somebody else.
That's right. That's really good, because that's true. I mean, that doesn't matter if you're male or female. We've all got a testimony. And I remember when I was in my 20s going to a singles retreat. And so there were some divorced people there, but we were all single in at that time. And I remember a woman, I've told this story before to a friend or two because it was pretty traumatic at first, but a woman in the bathroom, as we're both curling our hair and stuff, she's like, "So what's your testimony?" And she had been pretty vocal throughout the whole retreat. And so everybody pretty much knew what she had been through in her life, and the price of divorce and the price of everything. And so but here I am, like, 23 years old, 24 years old, and I'm totally naive, and I'm totally never had, really haven't done anything bad. I just, the worst thing I did was like have a drink, I think, or something, so I was kind of like, well, I've been a Christian all my life. My parents took me to church from the time I was born, just about, and I've been involved in different things. And she just kind of like, oh, okay, okay. And then later, when we were all together and she had the opportunity to stand up, she goes, "I just thank God that I'm not like the woman that I talked to in the bathroom who didn't have a testimony, that I have a testimony. I have been what I have been through. People see what I have done and how I have changed and how I've gone from this life to this life. And oh my goodness, if I could have crawled under something, I would have done it. I would have just crawled under the table, under my seat. I was so embarrassed that everybody knew she was talking about me. And it wasn't until later that I realized it's like, I have nothing to be ashamed of.
Right?
I wasn't, for lack of a better word, I hadn't been tainted. I hadn't been abused. I don't have those bad stories, and I didn't have them at that time. Not that other things haven't happened throughout my life, but I don't know. I guess it was something that I was like, well, I need a better testimony, Lord. I need a better testimony.
No, you don't. No, you don't.
Yeah. And I mean, that was the thing, but boy, was that was crushing. It was really crushing at that particular time, thinking that I was a nobody, that I was just nobody, because I didn't have a testimony like her. So yeah, so I guess
I thank goodness when I see people that don't have those kind of testimonies, and I had this running joke with God. I said, really, was I that much of a knucklehead? I had to go through all of that for you to get through to me.
exactly.
Was,
Yeah,
was
I
I
know.
that stubborn? Was I that obstinate? Was I this or that? Because a lot of it has to do with our own pride, our own ego, and
Right.
you know,
Yeah. And what we want, it's our own desires.
it's yeah,
I was teaching
it's
on
not
that.
like there's a demon. The one thing that I know is Hasatan is not, he is
Right.
not omnipresent. He cannot
Right.
know and be everywhere like
Right.
God can. And
Right.
so he doesn't have to. we are drawn out by our own fleshly desires and our own, dysfunctions, if you will, or whatever it is we're dealing with. And that's okay too. But just be honest about it.
Right.
We need to create an environment, not just in the messianic congregations or the overall body of Messiah, I think needs to be more transparent with, yeah, I'm struggling with pride. I'm struggling even with my ego, or I'm struggling with jealousy. I'm struggling. We all have something we struggle with,
Right. And I read that a rabbi, and this is probably very old, and I don't know when it was written, but Torah is the spice of evil inclinations. And what it meant was that the Torah, what we think of as a bunch of rules and regulations, but yet they help us manage our evil inclinations, whatever those are. And even the word evil inclination, I read where it was more like a creation gone bad type of thing, because we seek to create. We really do. We seek to create our own kingdoms. We seek to create, even if it's a ministry, we're seeking to create something to leave our mark on this world, and that comes out of our passions and our desires, but our own desires can be evil, and it's actually the word of God, and even these rules, in the sense that tell us how to treat our neighbor, how and who that we can have an intimate relationship with, right? I mean, we wouldn't be into porn and all those things if we really understood that in Leviticus 18 he told us who it was off limits with. It was off limits with your daughter-in-law, or your stepsister or stepson, or whatever, your stepmother. I mean, these things are off limits.
Or your neighbor's wife,
Right.
desiring, just another woman.
And you have a book called What's Lust Got to Do with It? And lust is more or less any kind of desire, right? We think of it as sexual, but it's any desire that really we make an idol of.
Right. Well, yeah, and I was playing off of the word, the song by King Turner, "What's Love Got to Do with It?" But
I was
lust,
around. Yeah, but I remember that song.
yeah, but lust has to do with everything. It's lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, all of that. And lust is the thing that has brought down kingdoms, has brought down ministries, whether it's physical lust or lust for power or greed. Any of those will bring down your life, and it'll come crashing, and it can go from generation to generation. And it's all of those kind of lusts that can drive generations, not just your lifetime, but the lifetime of your children and your grandchildren and all of that. And so when we make decisions, we're making generational decisions, not just a decision for right now, us today.
You're right.
And we don't see that.
No.
I've often thought, like, for myself, if I would have jumped in that river that day and drowned, I would have missed out on the joy of 2 other children, their spouses, their children. I have 10 grandchildren now, and 3 great-grandchildren, and they are almost all serving in the kingdom of God.
Wow.
It would have affected many generations.
And who they impress, or in the sense of
they have
they lead.
affected. Yeah, my son's a sergeant with LAPD, and he really does live by that, protect and serve. He's a really very compassionate person, loving person, and he affects thousands of lives. I've got one daughter that's a coach in the business realm. I have another that's a VP with the bank, and so and people and customers, and they train leadership, and they do this and that, and I'm thinking how that tentacles of fingers have gone out that would have never happened had I jumped in the river that day.
Right.
We don't, but a 15-year-old girl isn't standing there thinking about, oh, this could affect generations to come.
I
But
know.
but we need to get that revelation that everything we do, Scripture tells us that affects the following generations to
Right.
come.
Third and fourth. And you can see that. You can see it clearly when you look at families. You know, my father or my grandfather was an alcoholic. You know, he had one of his daughters became an alcoholic. Several of my cousins, you know, other family members became addicted to different things. And it does follow you. It follows you genetically in a sense. It's generational, but it's almost, you know, it's a spiritual thing. That's a spiritual DNA, I guess you could say, that follows you.
Right.
So
we mimic our parents. We mimic, it's interesting that I saw this meme one time and I thought, man, that is so true. It was a homeless man and a businessman sitting on a park bench. And the businessman had his briefcase and his suit and his tie, and the homeless man, well, you know how a homeless person normally looks.
yes.
And someone walked up and said to the businessman, why are you where you're at today? And he goes, my father was an alcoholic. And he said to the homeless man, why are you where you're at today? My father was an alcoholic. And both were right. But it's perception. Wow. It's perception. How do you perceive your family of origin and what happened to you?
Yes. Oh my goodness. That's so true, isn't it? Yeah. Beth Moore, I used to read her stuff and do her Bible studies. And she was like, each family member can be involved in the same event, same birthday party.
Right.
But each family member takes a picture of a specific time of that event. And that is how they remember that event. Where I remember the blowing out of the candles and the smile, you know, my sister might remember the harsh word that somebody used, you know, when they were like aggravated, you know, whatever. I mean, it's the picture you take right then and how different it can be in one family.
Oh, yeah. Know? Yeah. No, it's amazing. It's amazing. And that's how God created us, though. And that's, hence the 4 gospels.
Right. Same story told 4 ways.
4 ways. Yeah.
And people don't get that. So how, it's really funny that people don't understand that you have 4 point of views, be a cop for a day, right? And get trying to get witnesses to an accident or something, and you get like all these different points of view of it. And it's pretty amazing. We're all so different in what we concentrate on. So but this has been awesome. I appreciate your time and your specialty here because trauma is such a real thing that affects us for the rest of our lives if we don't overcome it in a way. But the way we overcome it is working through it and understanding that God is there. And that's, I'm not trying to simplify it, but it boils down to how you're going to, what you're going to do about it yourself, how are you going to work through it.
It breaks down to choose life. It's our choices. We still, even with our traumatic brains, we still have choices to make. We still have decisions to make. His desire for us is to choose life.
Right. Excellent.
And sometimes that's tough, but yeah. I wanted to, if I can do a shameless plug, we have a women's retreat coming up in November 10th through the 12th in Edmond, Oklahoma. And if I can give a number, it's you can call 405 999 8222.
8222. Okay, I'll put that on our show notes too.
Yeah. And if anybody wants to attend the conference, and we deal with all of these kind of things from a spiritual, theological point of view of healing and spiritual, emotional, and healing. And so
that's excellent.
But it's women only. So sorry, guys.
Okay. Sorry. I'll put that. Well, that's excellent, though. I think it's much needed that women, and it's unfortunate, but I do think there are some churches who can do that well, who know how to deal with the trauma of people's lives and even grief. But then there are other churches, I think, that sometimes don't even talk about it.
Well, and the idea of our conference too is to give women a safe place to go, because a lot of people don't want to talk about it in their own community,
Right.
what
Makes
they're
total
doing.
sense. Yes.
Yeah. So it's kind of a off-site
Mm-hmm.
environment,
Safer place.
safer place. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's
Well,
been such a joy to be on your program today. Thank you for asking me.
you're welcome. I appreciate your time and your specialty too there, because I think lots of good information, and I hope it helps somebody out there. I hope that who's listening, if they need this, if they need somewhere they can go to a safe place, that you'll look up this conference with Dr. Deb. So thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
Okay, I did too. Bye-bye.